On Friday morning, Joe Biden confirmed that the United States will send cluster bombs to Ukraine. The weapons have been banned in 108 countries who signed a treaty in 2008 called the Convention on Cluster Munitions. Absent from that list of signatories, of course, are the United States and Ukraine. And some people have thought that point relevant to bring up in defending Joe Biden's decision, including this Twitter user here, James. I don't know if this is a more prominent guy who just goes by James, but this reply got a lot of mentions here. I can't do this again. It's not a war crime. Neither the United States nor Ukraine are signatories to the Convention on Cluster Munitions.
God.
And so I actually tweeted back.
Why do you do this to me?
I tweeted.
You didn't even warn me about that.
to counter this guy's point. This guy says, okay, so neither the global military hegemon nor the most corrupt country in Europe agreed that they were war crimes. So they're not. That settles it. Right?
They're not. like if you like to go into villages and burn all the villagers, but you didn't sign anything, no war crime.
Yeah, no, it's not.
That's
war
it.
Crime. We didn't say. We never agreed.
This guy really needs to go lecture world leaders, because a lot of them, I think, they're under the impression that the war crime rests in the act, not in the signature. But apparently, he's got it figured out.
Right? No. Hey. Adolf Hitler never signed anything that said he couldn't
didn't
round
sign
people
shit.
up and put.
He wasn't a. I don't even think they had the Geneva Conventions then.
Yeah, no, I'm not signing that. No, I'm not signing. So in his mind, yeah,
I ain't signing nothing. Get that fucking thing out of here. I ain't signing that.
That's, I think, Mussolini you're thinking of. I think
that's
the impression you're doing.
Mussolini.
Yeah. Mussolini said, I ain't fucking signing shit.
I ain't fucking.
He leaned back. He said, I ain't fucking signing shit. Get that shit out of my face. Yeah, so anyway. The UK, France, and, of course, Germany. All right, we ragged on the Germans a bit there, but they, to their credit, key U.S. allies, have all agreed to ban the weapons. And that was what gave the United States some hesitation about going through and sending these weapons to Ukraine. So first, let's just demonstrate a little bit of how these bombs actually function and why they have been banned by 108 countries. So here are some slides. So the way it works is you have this bomb here being dropped out of the airplane. That bomb contains many different bombs within it. Okay, that's sort of the mother bomb, or now that Lockheed Martin has gone woke, we'll call this the birthing bomb, not the mother bomb. The birthing bomb. And what happens as it drops out of the plane, it births all these other bombs, as you can see here. And then because that happens very high up in the air.
Of indeterminate gender.
Right, yeah, exactly. Right. Because that happens very high up in the air, they land very far apart. It's a little tough to see in this graphic, but this is from the French press. They actually use football fields on the ground to sort of demonstrate the scope of the bombs. They fall many, many football fields apart. And so obviously it should be no mystery why it is considered a crime in over 100 nations to use these weapons, because it is impossible to operate a weapon like that with the precision necessary to guarantee that it's only going to hit targets and not innocent bystanders, right? So that's fairly simple stuff. Now, to call it straight, to be fair, as we have to do, Russia has been using these bombs throughout the war, as has Ukraine. So Ukraine has had these bombs. We just have not been sending it to them because of these concerns, right? Jen Psaki acknowledged that it was a crime to use these bombs. He or she is being questioned about the Russian use of the bombs. But here you could see from the White House's own mouth, they think that there is a problem surrounding these bombs because in many countries around the world, it would be considered a war crime to engage in the dissemination of these weapons.
Reports of illegal cluster bombs and vacuum bombs being used by the Russians. If that's true, what is the next step of this administration, and is there a red line for how much violence will be tolerated against civilians in this manner that's illegal and potentially a war crime.
It would be. I don't have any confirmation of that. We have seen the reports. If that were true, it would potentially be a war crime. Obviously, there are a range of international fora that would assess that. So certainly we would look to that to be a part of that conversation.
All right. So there you have it. Now, despite these concerns, obviously Joe Biden pulled the trigger on sending Ukraine these bombs. Here he is explaining his rationale to Fareed Zakaria.
Very difficult decision on my part. And by the way, I discussed this with our allies, discussed this with our friends up on the Hill. And we're in a situation where Ukraine continues to be brutally attacked across the board by munitions, by these cluster munitions that have dud rates that are very, very low, very high, that are a danger to civilians, number one. Number two, the Ukrainians are running out of ammunition. The ammunition that they call them 155 millimeter weapons. This is a war relating to munitions, and they're running out of that ammunition, and we're low on it.
Oh, we're low on it. Interesting. Okay, so if they're low on munitions, and we're low on munitions,
what if we get attacked and we need to retaliate with a war crime?
right? Well, yeah, exactly.
We're not going to be able to commit a war crime.
Seems like a solution to
No
this
way to run
problem
an
may be
empire.
wrapping up the war. If munitions are running low and it's looking increasingly unlikely that Ukraine will be victorious, I mean, even the most hawkish person has to look at this and see that the sensible thing to do here is to wrap it up. But I listened to Glenn Greenwald's interview with John Morsheimer. He wrote a recent article which was pretty grim in its outlook, basically saying, like, look, at this point, I don't know how they broker any kind of peace deal before it's too late. And now that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to go nuclear, but it means that you're in the very early stages of this thing, because at this point, Ukraine has integrated itself into the West so much that it may as well be a NATO ally. So at this point, like, what does a neutral Ukraine even look like, right? And so if that's a Putin red line, if that's a core demand, how do they satisfy that at this point, even if they wanted to? How could they? Right. And so that paints a very, very bleak and horrible picture. But, look, obviously the take on this from day one is that it never had to happen, and that once these things get going, there are interests that want them to keep going, and this is just one more piece of that. And now we are in a situation where we have to defy our allies. You notice Biden said, I consulted with our allies, right? Well, what are the allies going to say? No, don't send them? How? So what if we tell them go get their fucking shine box and, send them anyway? What does that mean? Like, we're the ones sending the weapons. If you look at who is actually bankrolling the war, it's not our allies. They're sending a little bit. It's us.
Right.
It's us.
Well, it always is.
So what are they going to do? Break up NATO over this? I mean, we destroyed infrastructure that supplies our ally, Germany, with natural gas. We already cucked our allies as brutally as we could, and they can't do anything, right? This is why I said we are the dominant military hegemon. Like, what we say goes, ultimately. And you need people in place who are going to be at least somewhat sensible about this. One of the things that Greenwald mentioned in that interview is that in Trump and Obama, we had two very, very different people with two very different leadership styles, obviously, and two very, very different worldviews. But they both shared in common a reluctance to go all in on Ukraine. Right? Which is why this did not happen. If you remember, Hillary Clinton, even after she left the Secretary of State's office, she was pressuring Obama from outside the government to declare a no-fly zone over Syria, which would have prompted this proxy war with Russia, with Syria as the theater. So it's not that, like, the West didn't have these plans for a while. It's just, I think part of this was that after George Bush, there was just such war fatigue that we happened to get two presidents back-to-back who weren't willing to take it all the way. Now you have a non-president. Now you have this guy, and you have the Jake Sullivan consultant class running the show, and they don't have any stake in fucking anything. They are just functionaries for the deep state interests that prop them up, and so that's why you have this.
Well, this is why when Trump started pointing out, like a New York businessman that he is, bad, mediocre, indifferent. In the end, he thinks like a New York real estate guy. Why are we paying for the defense of Europe?
Right.
They don't pay anything. Why are we even part of this? We're getting ripped off here, right? So all the establishment media freaks out, right? But they were never able to really articulate why that was not a good point, right? They just did the general, it's Trump, he's crazy pants, and he's alienating our allies. But they never explained why that was not a valid point, because this is why, from the perspective of the military-industrial complex, from the perspective of our ruling elites, that was a terrible position. It's the golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rule. You stop supporting their defense, and now when you want to do something fucking insane, like fight this out with Russia at the risk of World War III, what are they going to say? Now, if you had made them build up their own militaries and pay for their own defense, maybe they'd have a little backbone. Maybe they'd have a little spine. Maybe they'd have a difference of opinion. How can they have a difference of opinion when they don't even have a military? When our military has been their military since the end of World War II?
Well, yeah. I mean, yes, that's a very good point. But back to that question of, well, why did they never have an answer to Trump when he said, why are we wasting our time and resources and blood in these foreign wars? What does it make it? Why are we doing this? The reason they could never answer that is because Donald Trump's definition of we is very different from their definition of we. Donald Trump is a populist. His definition of we is the American people. Why are the American people making these investments in these overseas wars? When people like Obama, Bush, Bill Clinton, when they say we, they mean Davos. They mean
Right.
G7,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We to them is this international order, right, that must be maintained. And so it's worth it for that we to go and do all this in their mind.
And even
but
saying
it's not
that
worth
makes
it
you
for
a
the we
deplorable.
that Donald Trump is actually talking about when he says we.
Yeah, and that makes it that's why they feel such a need to delegitimize that kind of talk. What you just said, that if you read the op-eds in the Washington Post, if you listen to the Sunday morning roundtables, you're the Luddites. You're the people who can't accept progress. You're the regressive elements. You're the deplorables if you think in terms of nations, right? The smart people are globalists. The smart people see the world as a holistic system, right? It's Ned Beatty's speech and network. You're an old man, Mr. Beale, who thinks in terms of nations. There are no nations. It is one ecumenical system of corporations, right? That's the world that they live in.
Please clap.